Becoming a Jesuit is kind of a long process. You start as a Jesuit novice, which is 2 years in a place called the novitiate, and you do a combination of prayer and working with the poor. In the middle of all that 2 years, you do a 30-day silent retreat based on what are known as the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius Loyola, which is kind of an imaginative placing yourself in the gospel scenes and sort of accompanying Jesus through the gospel scenes imaginatively. After the novitiate, you take what are called your simple vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. After that, you do what's called first studies, which is a combination of philosophy and theology. And then following that, you do 3 years of full-time work, which is called, in the Jesuits, a regency. Most Jesuits like to teach. They'll teach in a high school somewhere. I worked overseas in the Jesuit Refugee Service, helping refugees in East Africa start small businesses for themselves. So after that 3 years is done, you go to theology studies, and you're 3 or 4 years of theology studies. And if you're a priest, you get ordained at the end. There's Jesuit brothers as well, people who are Jesuits but are not called to the priesthood. And then after ordination, you work full-time for a couple of years. I'm working in a Catholic magazine. And finally, at the end of probably 5 or 6 years after that, you take what are called your final vows. So the whole process is pretty long. It took me 21 years to become a Jesuit, which I think was a little too long for my taste. But that's pretty average. It takes about 20 years to become a full-fledged Jesuit. I like to say it's like being a made man in the mafia, or getting tenure at a university, or becoming a partner. You know, you've been in for a while, but you're finally fully accepted. So it's a pretty long process. Poverty is one of the 3 vows that we take. We take a vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And initially St. Ignatius Loyola, when he had his conversion experience, he was injured in a battle and was taken home to recuperate and started to think about doing something else with his life. He became very ascetical and gave up everything and really lived like a hermit. Lived in a cave, let his fingernails grow long, his hair grow long. And ultimately he realized that this wasn't really doing him much good, and he needed to moderate some of this. He ended up going back to school to learn, and so he thought, well, Jesuits should be free of material possessions, but they don't have to live, like they're hermits, like they're living in a cave and eating twigs and things like that. It's not a complete poverty. So Jesuit poverty is really about freedom. It's about the freedom of not owning things. It's about the freedom of living simply. And it's also about the freedom to not let any possessions come in between you and God. At the same time, it's supposed to help us identify with the poor. We do a lot of work with the poor, and we're supposed to try to live as close as possible to what St. Ignatius calls a family of slender means, people who don't have a lot. And also, it's supposed to model Christ. Jesus, when he lived on the earth, was living very simply, as a very simple man. And so those are the 3 things. It frees us up for service. It makes it so we don't have a lot of possessions to kind of like tie us down. It helps us identify with the poor, and it's an imitation of Christ. It's really trying to follow Christ more closely. Yeah, chastity is the most difficult thing to explain about religious life. Most people think it's crazy or unhealthy or unnatural. After the sex abuse crisis, people think that the sex abuse crisis came from chastity or from celibacy. But it's really, as I see it, a different way to love. It's certainly not for everybody. Clearly, most people are called to romantic love and married lives and having children. But for some of us, it works. And really what it is, it's loving many people freely and deeply. You're not attached to just one person. You don't have an exclusive relationship, so you're free to love many people, which is not to say that people who are married or are in a romantic relationship can't love many people. It's just to say that this is what works best for people in religious orders. And I find it very freeing. I find people can be freer with me in a sense. When I become close friends with somebody, they're not wondering, is he becoming friends because of sex? Does he have an ulterior motive, something like that. Men and women can feel comfortable with you. And really, in a practical level, it makes you a lot more mobile. You're not, in a sense, worried about what your wife or husband is going to be thinking about you moving or taking a new job. So it can be very freeing, but it really freaks people out. I mean, chastity really, in a culture that values sex, and rightly so much, it really disturbs people. But I think, for those people who are called to it, it can work very well if you live it in a healthy way, meaning if you have friends and have healthy work and a healthy prayer life. So I'm all for it, but it's not for everybody.